The 2009 edition of the Giro D'Italia was undoubtedly unforgettable in the eyes of any neutral spectator that is fond of cycling and of fireworks. The presence of undetectable performance-enhancing substances, the return to competition of former stars of the sport, and unmissable performances by riders who have carved out a little niche in our hearts. Do you want to know the keys to this particular competition and why we consider it to be the most doped Giro D'Italia in history? Well, without further ado, let the show begin. The winner. With 1 kilometre to go in the final time trial in Rome, Denis Menchov, the Russian Rabobank rider of systematic doping fame, came very close to losing the race after an unnecessary crash when he had a big lead in hand. Perhaps that's why we saw this surprisingly fattened reaction after crossing the finish line in a man who usually maintained a sober character, worthy of the best Primož Roglič in front of the cameras. He had won the Giro D'Italia, his second major race, and not just in any old way. He also won the Maglia Ciclamino for the points classification. That was after the disqualification of one of his rivals and 2 stage wins, which would later become 3 after the disqualification of yet another of his rivals. The following year we were able to see why the man who will never set foot in Spain again because of a financial debt beat several doped riders in such an uncontestable manner. It was Dr. Michele Ferrari himself who informed Lance Armstrong, in papers confiscated by the USADA in 2010, that Putin's son, climber and also time trialist par excellence in that edition of the Giro, Menchov had ridden in the hardest moments of that edition at an average power of 6.2 watts per kilo. It is common knowledge that if you exceed 6 watts per kilo in this type of 3-week competition at such moments for extended periods, your performance is not normal. Curiously, years later he was sanctioned by the UCI for anomalies in his biological passport, but his results were annulled from the 2009 Tour de France onwards, so just 1 month after his Giro victory. It was clear, in France Menchov was doping heavily, but 30 days earlier he was cleaner than an Egyptian pyramid, or so the UCI would have us believe. The runner-up. Unlike Menchov, Danilo Di Luca is a character vilified by the UCI and other colleagues, and the Italian multi-tool Piccolo has not won many friends during his career. Di Luca had won the 2007 Giro, and he wanted to continue to prove at the modest Irish team, officially Irish anyway, LPR Brakes, that he was still a star after a horrible 2008 season. Well, at the age of 33, Di Luca was able to revive his laurels and he arrived in Rome even with a chance to win the Giro. No more and no less than 2 stage victories he won on the road, and the Maglia Ciclamino of the points competition as well, and this in addition to being leader of the race for 8 days. Di Luca was in contention for the pink jersey at all times, but he fell just 43 seconds short of a second major victory in this great round. Only 2 months later, after having several anomalies in his biological passport, the UCI detected in several anti-doping controls that Danilo had tested positive for Epio-Sera in 2 mountain stages of that Giro. The Italian eventually confessed to CONI and he was fined almost €300,000. And, of course, the loss of results in that edition of the Giro. Years later he re-offended and he was sanctioned for life. The third classified. Franco Pellizotti is one of the most legendary characters of the last 20 years in the world of cycling. In principle he came to this Giro D'Italia as Ivan Basso's teammate, who returned to competition after being sanctioned for the Operation Puerto. But the tyrant Gentile was no longer Berisho, treated by Bjarne Riis, so it had to be this long-haired and charismatic climber who took the leadership of the mythical Liquigas team. And he did not do badly at all, being amongst the best from the start in the mountain stages, and losing the Giro because of his poor performance against the clock. He was the winner of the very short stage that climbed the blockhouse, and was the favourite who best reached the last decisive week of the Giro, finishing third, almost 2 minutes behind the winner Menchov. 2 years later we learned why. Pellizotti was again sanctioned for biological passport anomalies, with results that equated a doping test carried out on the Italian climber in May 2009 with a doping positive. The result was a €115,000 sanction and 2 years out of competition, also losing his results between 2009 and 2011, including the Giro D'Italia podium and the King of the Mountains jersey in the Tour de France, something that seems not to have mattered to the current Bahrain Victorious team. They signed him, and they made him a super gregario at 40 years of age in the mountains of Grand Tours. Finally, his third place on the podium was curiously occupied by Ivan Basso. Other illustrious disqualifications. In the Giro, in which the Belgian Kevin Seldryers won the white jersey of Best Young Rider and then disappeared from the cycling world, several riders were also disqualified from this competition. For example, the winner of the mid-mountain stage between Forlì and Faenza, Leonardo Bertagnolli, the Androni Giocattoli rider, who also produced anomalous results in his biological passport, in this case 3 years after his last victory as a professional. Another disqualified, known to all, was Tadej Valjavic of AG2R, initially 9th classified in that Giro d'Italia, and also known as a climber and hotel manager. In his case, he manipulated his blood and ironed out anomalies in his biological passport, the passport that worked so well to detect cheaters at the time. But he was found out, and thus eliminated was his remarkable result. Moreover, this was the Giro d'Italia in which we could see how Chris Froome, then in the ranks of the modest Barlow World team, twisted like a good white Kenyan on the ramps of the Madonna de San Luca de Bologna, just to be incinerated by Simon Gerrans, in a performance which no doubt demonstrated how his life was before having the superpowers that gives you a therapeutic use authorization. The great guest star. It is well known how the Giro d'Italia organisation has been paying huge amounts of money to superstars to participate in the race. In the 2009 edition, it was the turn of none other than Lance Armstrong in his comeback year, making his debut in the Corsa Rossa at the tender age of 38. He was the perfect claim for the centenary Giro, but Lance couldn't live up to it. After a crash in the Vuelta a Castilla y León, in which he fractured his collarbone, low-cost Lance was now more low-cost than ever, and he went to the Giro with low expectations. In fact, he was more in the news for extra sporting matters, such as the removal of Astana's advertising on the jersey of Brunel's team for the team members not receiving their salaries on time. He did show some quality in the last week, as in the blockhouse stage, where he was very close to the winner Pellizotti for half the climb, but had to settle for a discreet 12th place finish, whilst his teammate Levi Leipheimer, after the sanctions, finished 4th. Logically, Armstrong was following Dr. Ferrari's plans, and looking at his 3rd place finish in the Tour de France 30 days later, he showed a good physical condition for his 38 years of age. That's what happens when you go 3 years without racing. As you can see, a great Giro d'Italia, with teams like Carpin Galicia, Barlow World, Rabobank of Dr. Leinders, LPO Brakes, the Flying Liquigas, Acqui Sapone, Fuji Servetto, and Astana of Johan Brunel, the Giro with the most dopers in history.